friends, and welcome back. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about your consciousness and understanding how we are made and how we are wired in the attempt to give you a little bit of perspective on how to navigate your life better. So, I'm reminded of this term that I learned in my formative years of education. There was a Latin term that was tabula rasa. And what tabula rasa meant in social psychological terms is that we are born as babies with essentially what ancient philosophers refer to as a blank slate. So let me back up a piece and let me talk about consciousness and what consciousness is. And so when you think about everything that is around you, everything that you're seeing, what you may refer to as God or the universe, that is consciousness. That is the overall consciousness of existence. That consciousness is then concentrated down into these physical bodies. So you have the broader overall consciousness, and then you have the consciousness that we are. We essentially came out of the larger consciousness, and we are focused here in these forms or down into this human body. So what the ancient philosophers were saying, and the people that kind of came up with this term or figured out that when we come here, there is no preset agenda. So we are definitely born with the personality. Now, and I believe that we come here with certain tendencies. If you all listen to me for a while, I refer often to the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and that is a personality assessment that categorizes people according to personality traits. And it is money. It is very accurate. I'm certified in it. I've worked with it for a number of years. If you put 100 people in a room and they have this particular personality, odds are they're going to behave in a certain way, and it's very reliable. It may not be exact because human beings are diverse. That is what makes God God, is that we have all these forms of consciousness. So no two are ever going to be exactly the same, which is good because that is the beauty of life, right? That is what makes life fun and interesting. So when I say that the Myers-Briggs is reliable, I mean just that. It may not be exact from person to person, but you're going to definitely see patterns and trends that these particular personality profiles are going to behave these particular ways in these situations. Not all the time, but pretty accurately. We are born with certain personal tendencies or personality tendencies, but that's it. Everything else outside of that, psychologists have relied upon this notion that we come here tabula rasa, which is the Latin term for blank slate, and that everything else that we become is based on our experiences and what we encounter. So when a baby is born with a blank slate or tabula rasa, it is their parents, it is their education, it is their society, it's what they see on TV. All of their interactions begin to shape who they are. And when you think about that, that means that essentially, with effort, and it does take effort, I'm not going to say that it's not going to require effort, but with effort, if we've learned all of that information and it's not uniquely germane to who we are at a spiritual or at a soul level, we can go back and unlearn it. We can go back and undo it, right? So if we're born with a blank slate and then we've essentially just gathered all this information or dysfunction, we can go back and we can see what is there, and then we can decide what to keep and what to throw away. So, why is that important? It's important because when you start examining who you are and how you're showing up in the world as a human being, there are going to be things that you've picked up along the way that just don't belong there. That really aren't your preference, because to be whole means to be without dysfunction in as many areas as possible. And I'm not a purist. I don't think that we're ever going to be perfect. I don't think that we're ever going to be pure in every form. I just don't think that that is the role of life. I think that the pitfalls and the quirks, I think all of those things kind of make us who we are and give us the beauty of diversity. So I'm not saying that we're going to show up as these perfect beings in these perfect forms. I just don't believe that we are. But I believe that we are currently carrying way more dysfunction than we need to carry, simply because when we were born, we allowed so many things. Let me rephrase that, because when you're a baby, you're not allowing anything. But our society is designed such that it is conducive to allowing all these external factors to shape who we are. So if our parents knew better, and they didn't, and this is no judgment against them, they were born into this system, right? So they did the best that they could, but in a perfect world, let's just say, in a world that was more conscious or more evolved, they would have protected us from certain things. Like, I can remember when I was a kid, or when I was younger, teenager, the Freddy Krueger movies were real popular. And I can remember being or going in a household, and I would see parents allowing their children to watch certain things, whether it was a horror flick or sex scenes, especially in the 80s. Those movies could kind of get a little out of control. There was Night of the Living Dead. That used to scare me to death. I was a teenager, and I thought, could that really happen? So the more of that you're exposed to, it starts to shape you in a way that is not preferable. So let's take that example that I just gave you of Night of the Living Dead. As I grew and got older, I had certain fears that probably wouldn't have been there had I not been watching those kinds of things, whether it was It's Alive when I was a really small baby, or small child. I was probably 5 or 6 when they had this movie. It was like this horror flick where this baby, he had like this disfigured hands, and he was terrorizing the whole town. I remember this scene where I think he was like in the sewer and they were trying to get him. I mean, it was just absolute insanity. Very scary for me when I was 5 or 6 years old. And then after that, there was The Exorcism, and then Rosemary's Baby. Saying all that to say that when those kinds of things get written on your blank slate, it can cause you to have a certain viewpoint or a certain outlook on life. And so if our parents had known better, they would have begun to protect us from things like that. Even things like bullies on the playground. I know that a lot of school systems kind of have a hands-off approach to that the kid will figure it out or it makes them tougher. But no, because when that is happening, the blank slate is being written on, and it will create things like insecurity or feelings of unworthiness or certain fears, or it can even cause the opposite psychological disorders like anger or aggressiveness. Like when you are picked on as a little kid, sometimes something changes who you are on the inside, and so you go through life feeling that you have to be aggressive or that you have to fight in order to be heard or in order to be validated. All that is just dysfunction. And I'm raising my hand. How many of us have all those kinds of things that are kind of written on our blank slate that show up for us in life at one time or another? And typically in situations that we don't want them to show up in. So I wanted to come and just kind of put that out there and get you to start thinking about what is written on your slate that doesn't belong. Because what's written on the slate is what determines your life experience. And so, the less things that you have written on your slate, the more you're moving through life from this standpoint of wholeness, and you have control over your life experience, and these dysfunctions aren't raising their ugly heads in the wrong moments and causing pain and causing drama. And that is kind of the standard for most of us as human beings. But there's another way to be, in that you do move towards wholeness and that you do have control over your emotions, and you're not creating as many dramatic experiences or painful experiences. And so that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that if you're born tabula rasa and all these life experiences have essentially written on the blank slate, then none of that is the real you. And so you can go back and try to unlearn or unravel or no longer participate in those particular past worldviews. We'll put it like that. So I spoke of a child being bullied. If you can go back and you can say, okay, well, when I was in grade school, I was always being ganged up on and I was always being bullied. And because of that, I can see where I now developed an issue with my self-esteem. I don't feel confident because the bullies wrote on my blank slate and they made me feel that I wasn't good enough. It is as simple as that. Going back and being able to recognize where that behavior came from, and then seeing the irrationality of it. That happened to you when you were a kid. It was no fault of your own. It wasn't even the fault of the bullies. They just didn't know who they were. They chose fear instead of love. But now at 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 years old, you don't have to continue to carry that or to hold that worldview or to operate from that particular moment that was written on your blank slate. You can start to clear that. You can say, well, hey, unfortunately, I picked up a little something that I didn't have to carry, but I'm here now, and I can go back and I can start to disconnect from that experience, and I can start to write something else on the slate. And what you're writing on the slate now is, I am worthy. I was always worthy. Because that happened to me, something in my psyche got a little twisted, and I grabbed onto a worldview that I wasn't worthy, but it holds no water. It's not true. It holds no value. And so I don't have to continue to believe that at this point. I can begin to start to let that go. And so as we do that, the more areas that we do that in, we are now starting to move in wholeness. And I don't know about you, but I've seen that person that has some level of dysfunction. I can remember when in my corporate career, you could be in a meeting and someone presents their idea, another person has an opposing idea, and then one coworker is just, ready to set the whole conference room ablaze because someone has challenged their viewpoint. More times than not, that is coming from some level of dysfunction that they just have yet to realize or become aware of. So if they would go back into their history, let's make a hypothetical, there could have been a situation where when they were children in their family, maybe everyone was always listened to except for them. And so they just adopted this belief that in order for me to be heard, let's say they were the youngest member of the family, and You know how it is when you're a little kid and you have older siblings. Sometimes you just get pushed aside or left behind. And so this person may have adopted this belief that in order for me to be heard, I'm going to have to make my presence known. I'm going to have to be loud or be belligerent or stand in my power or stand in my truth. And they're just creating unnecessary drama for themselves in the here and now based on something that was written on their blank slate from years ago. It's not true, it's not relevant, it's not accurate. It is just creating unnecessary pain in this moment because all the people around the conference table are thinking, well, now we all have an opposing viewpoint. A rational thinking person understands that that is the diversity of life, that two people will never be exactly the same. And so it is quite possible that you will run into someone that has an opposing viewpoint. Even twins have some diversity. That is what makes God's creation amazing. And so it is logical that you could run into someone that's not going to see things exactly the same way that you do. And when they present their viewpoint, there is no need to start getting upset because they don't agree with you. So this hypothetical situation, the anger, the pouting, and I've witnessed this in the corporate world, the storming out of the conference room is simply based on your dysfunction because everyone else is sitting at the table thinking, oh, well, we've got two great ideas here. Let's figure out which one is better or can we blend them together? And so now you're mad because someone doesn't agree 100% with what you've presented. And so this is what that dysfunction can look like. And we're moving through life not even really realizing that we're carrying it simply because something was written on our slate. And so now you're here in the conference room. Coworkers are giving you side eye. Boss is thinking she does this every time in a meeting. I may have to let her go. Like you're creating unnecessary drama for yourself. Whereas if you could catch it, if you could be in that meeting when that person opposes your viewpoint or opposes your idea, and you could just take a deep breath as soon as you feel the hair standing up on the back of your neck, and you're saying to yourself, oh, I know what this is. This is that. This is that thing that happened to me when I was younger. And I don't have to respond from that place right now. I can start to let that go. And so taking a deep breath with the awareness of what is happening in the moment and being able to present your idea in the best possible way that you can and align your energy with it, meaning that I don't have to be right here. I want the best possible outcome for my company and for everyone at this table. And I'm going to align my energy with that. That's a totally different way of showing up. Now everybody at the table wants you on their team. They want you to be a part of their project because you come without dysfunction, with well thought out ideas. You're willing to accept another person's viewpoint and to work towards solutions and achieving goals. Totally different way of showing up. And so we want to be mindful that we are probably carrying some level of dysfunction. I always say this: if you have pain, more times than not, there's dysfunction there. And being able to go back and kind of start digging through that and looking into that and figuring out where is this coming from and what created it, and then being able to let it go. If you can just let it go without going back and finding the root cause, that's great. Sometimes going back and seeing it and realizing, oh, well, this happened when I was 7. So why am I still acting from this particular worldview when that happened to me when I was 7 years old and I didn't even really have a worldview at that point. I don't have to carry it. So sometimes going back and seeing it, you can kind of put it in its proper place or put it in its proper perspective. Like, okay, well, it's ridiculous for me to still be acting from my 7-year-old self 30 years later in a meeting with coworkers that had nothing to do with what happened to me when I was 7, and on and on and on and on and on. I hope this makes sense, because a lot of us are showing up in situations with family members, with spouses, with children, with coworkers, with these levels of dysfunction that are simply because something was written on our slate. And we have all kinds of things written on our slate. Like I said, we were conditioned by our parents. So some of us are living the lives that our parents lived, even though it's causing pain. Some of us are raising our children the way that our parents raised us, even though it's causing pain. We're not stopping long enough to evaluate and ask, is this really me? Is this really true? Is this really what I want for my life right now? And we can always take the best parts of it. We can always take the best parts of any situation. And then we can leave the parts that aren't serving us behind. They don't belong on our slate. So let me summarize what I'm talking about here. We are consciousness projected down into these human forms. And so when we come into these bodies, we do have a personality. We do have personality traits, but none of that stuff is locked. Right? We come here tabula rasa. And tabula rasa is the ancient term for this social psychological notion that you acquire everything that you are along the way. And if you can acquire everything that you are along the way, you can also let go of the things that aren't serving you. You aren't particularly born with these levels of dysfunction. It's coming from the media, certain beliefs that society holds. We grew up in a very patriarchal society that said that men are the breadwinners. All women must have children. Some people are living their lives out of that belief or notion because it was written on their slate, whether or not that was true for them or not. We all have a particular destiny. We all have certain paths in life that we can choose. We are in control of that. And the only way that we can access those beautiful pathways, those alternative routes for us, is if we can go back and undo the conditioning. If we can go back and just take an eraser and start erasing what was written on the slate by everything outside of us, and then we get our pen and start writing what do we want on the slate. So the example that I gave of the meeting, do I want to be that person that is showing up and now everybody's uncomfortable and people are afraid to interact with me simply because my idea was rejected? Or do I want to show up as this person that is willing to work with anyone to make sure that my team moves ahead and my company moves ahead and my coworkers are their best? Which way do I want to show up? And so I think the latter is better, that we can go back and rewrite that. And so the work is not particularly easy. It requires constant diligence. It requires awareness. But it's possible, and it will reward you. Your effort will be rewarded with just showing up as a happy person, just showing up as someone that's loving life, just showing up as someone that feels good about their experiences. Just imagine going back to the coworker scenario. The person storms out, idea was rejected. And I remember these kinds of coworkers. I remember running into these kinds of coworkers in my 20-year career in corporate America. So you storm out of the meeting, steam's coming off of you, coworkers afraid to talk to you for the rest of the day. Then you went home. You're still pissed. You are not fully engaged with your children because you're still angry about what happened earlier in the day. You're venting about it with your husband. So it's costing you in ways that aren't serving your climb. It's not serving your advancement in life. Whereas the second scenario of being able to just catch it in the moment, like, okay, here's that thing again. It's going back to when I was a kid and this thing happened. I was constantly ignored by my family, by my siblings, and being able to say, I don't have to pull that into my future. That I can show up differently. I can show up as this evolved team participant, team member. I can show up as this evolved team member, and I can contribute greatly to this organization. Now, everybody wants you to be a part of it, right? Word's getting out around the town, and so maybe another company will recruit you for higher pay because you're so good at what you do. So that is a much better scenario than the person that went home pissed off and wasn't engaged with their family, thought about it all night, came back the next day. Co-workers are still avoiding you. So I hope this makes sense, because we want to start looking at ourselves and thinking in terms of, this doesn't belong here. So I'm taking an eraser and I'm removing it. And then I'm going to pencil in what I want. I want to be this better person. I want to show up as this higher minded being. I want to be more engaged with my children, or I want to be a better spouse. I don't want to carry the same dysfunction that my parents carried in their marriage. So here's what I'm writing on my slate. I'm going to be open. I'm going to listen. I'm going to extend grace. I'm going to edify all of my family members. That is the work of this journey. That is the work of being consciousness in these human bodies, to mine the real us, to go back and figure out what belongs and what doesn't belong, and being able to shed it and allow it to teach us, to be able to garner the wisdom from those situations so that we can transform ourselves into the real us. And so it's more of like a shedding, to be honest with you, because you're born tabula rasa, like you're born with what you needed to navigate this life well. It's just that our society and the environment that we're in conditions us out of that. So the work is the shedding of what doesn't belong. And as you do that, then you show up in life as your authentic and complete and whole self. And when you do that, your happiness, your joy, your peace is going to be guaranteed. So I hope that helps. Let it go. You know what those things are. You know the behaviors and the patterns that aren't serving you. You feel them when they raise their ugly heads. Let it go. Become the person that God intended for you to be. Begin the work of doing that, and let the rest of the journey of your life be one that you're in control of, that you write on the slate who you are and how you're showing up, and let that be one of wholeness. Let that be one where you're welcomed into every home and every table, simply because you've done the work. You have gotten rid of all your dysfunction, And now you are simply a human being that people want access to. They want you to be a part of their lives. They want to be a part of what you have going on. It's a much better way of showing up in life. All right, guys. I hope that blesses you and enjoy the rest of your day.